Hey there, you were watching the Data Dispatch. Thank you for tuning in. So about a month ago, I backpacked the Lost Coast Trail, and if you're unfamiliar with it, I've done a whole video series planning to backpack the Lost Coast that I'll link to somewhere around here, up here in the comments below, and the trip was awesome. Today, we're going to do a quick post-mortem where we talk about the things I got right and the things I got wrong on the planning and execution of this particular backpacking trip. All right, let's start with the good stuff. What I got right. First, go with Bill's Lost Coast Shuttles. This is a guy I was worried about. He doesn't really have a web presence or anything like that, just a phone number, but he was awesome. Unfortunately, our rental car actually broke down or it wouldn't start on the way about an hour or so, hour and a half out from the trailhead. We called Bill. You know, it's one of those things where there's no cell phone service and you can break it up, but he was more than willing to work with us. He was going to come get us and then, take us back as far as we needed to when we got back a week later. He was great. Great attitude, great service, 5 stars for Bill. Secondly, I carried the Z-Packs Flex system for my duplex tent. Now, if you're unfamiliar, the Z-Packs Duplex is a trekking pole supported tent, and the Flex basically turns it into a freestanding tent, and I am so glad I took it. It was a lifesaver. My buddy who took just a trekking pole supported tent struggled so much more than I did setting up. The sand is difficult enough, but the wind, oh my goodness, it was crazy. Now, I'm not saying you can't do this trail with just a trekking pole supported tent. You can, but you better practice and you better be prepared, and you better be prepared for setting up in very difficult conditions. You're likely going to be setting up in very soft sand with a lot of wind. Third, I decided to wear gaiters for the first time ever on this trail. And if you don't wear gaiters and you're going to do this, I would highly recommend reconsidering and wearing them for this hike. It is impossible to exaggerate how much sand you're going to be walking on. It's basically 20, 30 miles of sand, and you're just going to be kicking it up. It's going to be in your shoe constantly. I went with the Dirty Girl gaiters in this lovely American flag motif, and I wear Ultras, and they worked awesome. I'll put some links below, but go with whatever makes you smile. Fourth, we took the tide seriously and with a good reason. We walked from north to south, and the first little section is just one little point. That wasn't bad at all, and I could see maybe getting across there when it's not at low tide. The second section, honestly, wasn't that bad either. It looked like maybe there'd be about 2 points where you'd have to really deal with if you weren't at low tide. But the third section, wowzers. I mean, we went at peak low tide. Well, peak high low tide. There are 2 low tides a day. One's low, one's a little bit higher. We were at the high tide, the high low tide. But still, it was like you couldn't have planned it better for low tide, and our shoes got wet. There was no way around it. I mean, we weren't in danger of drowning or anything like that. It was, the bottom of the rubber on our shoes got wet, but that was at peak low tide. So I could definitely see how that thing would get dicey if you weren't careful. In fact, we saw, you're kind of walking along a cliffside, sort of a cliffside, and there are these little fingers that come out, and we saw trails coming up those fingers and over where I'm sure people were there and it wasn't low tide. I don't know how, they were vertical. I don't know how anybody got up there without a rope, much less carrying their pack. So take the tide seriously. Fifth, I studied what poison oak looks like, and I am really glad I did because the trail is covered. So definitely, if you don't know what poison oak looks like, take a little picture if you need to, but it is everywhere. I know some people carry Tecnu. I'll put a link below. Supposedly it helps with poison oak. I've never used it. And I was super, super careful on this trail, so luckily I didn't need it. But if you're going, make sure you know what poison oak looks like. And lastly, I carried almost no water on this trail. Now, I called the ranger station, and you should do the same to make sure the streams are flowing. But if they are, I carried half a liter, and there was just water. It wasn't every half mile, but every mile, mile and a half. It was definitely a good way on this trail to cut some pounds out of your pack. All right, now, what we got wrong. It wasn't a lot of big stuff this time, but first, this trail is not easy. I didn't really train for it. I had broken my arm, so I was in particularly bad shape. I really didn't expect this hike to be that hard. I mean, it's mostly flat. It's not really that far, but man, I was wrong. You're just walking on sand the whole time. You're walking on rocks, and it's difficult. And not in a way that I just don't know how you train for it. I was rarely, if ever, out of breath, but I don't know how you train for walking on bowling ball sized rocks or wet sand for just miles on end unless you have access to a beach. One pro tip I would say though is that when you get to the sections where you're just on the beach, I actually found it way easier to actually walk if you're wearing like trail runners or something like that, to walk in where the surf is coming up, where the sort of ankle deep water. I found it way easier than walking up on the beach where the sand was looser and you were just kind of like this and it was more of a slope. So highly recommend walking actually down in the surf. Just keep an eye out for rogue waves. There were definitely some sections where we had to, or, you know, definitely a couple times we had to sort of run up. You weren't going to get washed out to sea or anything, but you were going to get soaked. Number 2, I totally mismanaged the sun. This trail has almost no shade at all. I thought I was prepared. I bought a new sun hat. I took a buff, but I got a blister on the side of my nose on the side that faces the water. I don't know if it was a reflection off the ocean or what, but I mean, it was bad. And I hate getting sunburned. I'm scared to death of where that leads. So if you're going on this trail, be prepared. There's basically no shade. Take more sunscreen and apply sunscreen more than you were used to. I think it's the reflection off the ocean. It really messed up the right side of my face. Number 3, we were unprepared as a team, I think, to deal with the wind and sand and how that affected setup. We struggled so hard the first night to get set up. We were just setting up individually, as we always do. When in retrospect, if we had just set up each person's tent as a team, it would have gone 5 times smoother. We had just never dealt with that amount of wind and that exposing of an environment and how much more difficult that made setup. And by the time you have half of your stuff out of your bag, all you can think about is getting your stuff set up without it blowing away or getting destroyed or whatever. Cooler heads, or maybe smarter heads, would have just hit rewind and, you know, helped each other out, but we did not. We just pushed through. And lastly, I still did not take enough video to make a quality trip video. When I get home, I love making these videos, but I just never have enough. When I'm walking, it's hard for me to get out of hiker zone and into video zone, and I've got to work on it. And then when I get to camp, I set up my tent. All I want to do is chill. I just never take enough. I get home and I'm disappointed in the quality of the video I can actually make. So I'm still working on that. So that's it. I think these kind of postmortems are actually helpful in planning the next trip. In this case, we did, I think, way more things right than wrong, and that ratio is generally flipped in a good way over time as we've gotten more experienced, although there are still for sure trips where it's vice versa. And I think I'm mostly past the stage where it's like, what gear should I take or what gear should I leave behind? But you can still learn from every single trip you take, and I think actually writing down what you did right and writing down what you did wrong helps with that process. If you liked this video or thought it was informative, please hit that thumbs up button. If you know of anybody thinking about doing the Lost Coast Trail or just who may like the content, maybe share it with them. And definitely don't forget to hit subscribe. I know it's been a little bit slow recently. I broke my elbow, but that's healed now. So we're going to be talking about the duplex flex pole system. Hopefully I've got enough footage for some sort of trip report video. I've got a new car camping water cooler I want to talk about, all kinds of stuff. But until next time, go have some fun outside. See you soon.